Hi, welcome to Meet a Yogi. I'm Suzanne DULIN, and I'm here with Kara Thorsen.
Hi.
And I'm going to hide everyone but us from this recording. The other person who's here, you can reach us through the chat if you want to talk. And Kara, welcome to Meet a Yogi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Thank you. And we're planning to do this more. Kara Thorsen is the owner of Yoga Equanimity, and which I totally just screwed the pronunciation.
Very good.
In Montreal, Canada. She is an Iyengar yogi. And tonight we're going to talk about her tagline, which is Meet the Resistance. So welcome, Kara, again.
Thank you.
And I want to hear, we started talking about like this idea of the resistance. And one thing I forgot to put into the conversation, the introduction, is that you started out your practice because you had scoliosis, and that has been a path of inquiry. So I thought that we might start with that
Absolutely
starting point as a discussion about then this idea of the resistance. And before we start, can you tell me what you mean by the resistance, so that people who are watching this are not like trying to figure out what the conversation's about?
You know, so often when we're in our practice, you know, with BKS Iyengar himself, when he was in his practice, very often then in teaching, we would hear a vocabulary. Some of it is anatomically correct. Some of it is just from his practice. And it was probably 1 year in my practice after everything in life comes at you in all different directions. And I was in my practice and it was just like, okay, meet the resistance. Meet the resistance. And the resistance wasn't necessarily, or it didn't have to be necessarily anything in my body. It could have been something in my mind. It could have been something in my life, but turned into a focal point within the body or within the psychology. So wherever something is aggressing you, let it aggress you for a moment and then meet it. And then sometimes you'll win, sometimes you'll lose, but at least you were present. So I guess it's my now. It's the now I want people to be aware of, that because life is coming at us and it's not going to stop coming at us just because we're tired. In fact, that's when it's going to even come more at us. You know, that's when we have to make the critical decisions, especially when we don't want to. And so they kind of tie in together, that equanimity. Like, how are you meeting your resistance? Are you meeting it through avoidance and I'm not doing it, I don't want to touch it, I don't want to? Are you meeting it with anger, or are you meeting it with equanimity?
Tell me a little bit about this period. So it sounds to me like this phrase, meet the resistance, was kind of a mantra almost, or just a voice that was coming into your head as you were practicing. What was happening during that year that you found when that was happening?
Well, I had just moved out of my old apartment where I had the little yoga room, my first studio. We were there from 2008, or when we were there, I think I lived there from 2006. I started teaching full time in 2008, and it was the little yoga room. And, you know, I went through a divorce in that apartment and in that yoga room. And for a long time, my practice was bring it on. Very confronting. Bring it on. You know, whoever's going to throw something at me now, bring it on. I'm ready. Bring it on. And when we moved out of that space and moved into this space, you know, we were still the little yoga room, but it was kind of like, who are we? What's happening here? Who have we become? We're rid of all of that. Where have we gone? What are we going to be doing? And so we were here for 3 years before I changed the name. It just changed in September. Meet the Resistance started before that. Meet the Resistance started before I changed the name, but then it kind of formed into another way of how am I meeting the resistance? So this mantra, as you say, and that's perfect, became actually a philosophy of now who we are and what we're growing into.
I'm curious about, are they attracted by it? Is there your students, you know, are you introducing them to that concept early on? And what did they say? You know, it's such an interesting thing to put right out there.
Isn't it? And I think probably people, before we put it on the website, I had been saying it in class for a couple of years, right? So they were used to hearing it like, okay, you know, you can't run from a wolf, you can't turn back, you just have to stare it down and meet the resistance. And so they were hearing this for a long time. And I'm sure on the website, it's a bit confronting because, like, what does that mean? And I think more than anything, it kind of just arouses a curiosity. Like, what does that mean? Because yoga's supposed to be all soft and flowery, and aren't I supposed to get a whole bunch of affirmations about what a good person I am?
You're definitely not with somebody who's like, you know, let's talk about the theory of law of attraction.
Yeah, but it's not that I have no compassion. I absolutely do, but we all have to be there, because sooner or later your story is coming at you. And then what, are you going to let your story define you, or are you going to have your own definition of it? So it's really, it's always a parable, right? Like, how far do we go into our own? I remember studying with Kevin Gardner once, and he said, who are we without our stories? And that stayed with me because it's true. It's like, okay, I know I have my stories and they're my reality, and you have your stories and you have your reality. And that's part of who we are, and a very important part of who we are. But if all of that is stripped away and we just have to come, who can we be? And
right.
That's important because...
And it's interesting that I just took a workshop at Kripalu, and it's specifically been thinking a lot about that issue of the story. And what we did in this workshop, this was with Yoganand Michael Carroll, who's been one of the longtime Kripalu yoga students and teachers. He actually studied with Swami Kripalu. Like, I was told by another teacher there that if I wanted to learn how Swami Kripalu taught, that I should study with Yoganand Michael Carroll. That he was the person who had really, really gone as far with that practice, similar to Swami Kripalu's. And he was teaching techniques that were coming out of old tantric texts of doing breath mastery work along with asana, yoga postures, which he was saying that, like, if you look at the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, that there's only like 28 poses in there, but there's also bandhas, the locks, energy locks, and there's also breath work. So that the intention was that you would actually combine all these things, and out of those you actually could create many more practices, because you would combine a bandha and a breath mastery and a position. And the idea was that it's in your belly where you have that sense of yourself, that ego, and that you can do this breath mastery work to confront it and unwind. There was these ideas in the time of Tantra that you could kind of unknot yourself, like there were these knots, and kind of unravel your story in a way, and then recreate a new story.
Yeah.
Be able to examine what are the things what is it that you've created, and then out of these ideas, which ones are serving you and which ones perhaps need to be shifted.
Yeah.
And then we actually did talk, which is part of what Swami Kripalu, he had a vow of silence. There's a lot of things about talking and silence where we would actually talk to other people to actually tell a new story after we discovered, this through inquiry, these new ideas. Because if you don't tell the story, then you can't really create that new experience, which has been a real shift for me to think about.
That's amazing. Yeah. I
started really, when I have some kind of mental breakthrough, I make a point now to call someone up or to, talk with somebody and tell a new story.
Yeah. Hey, and that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Because I think that either discussing or writing is probably our best psychoanalyst of ourselves, because then we can see it or we can hear it. And already when we hear ourselves telling our story, we already know if there's a victim or if there's a protagonist or the antagonist. and which one we are in that story. So it's interesting to, to get a different perspective of it. And I think that yoga's incredible, and then it brings you so many different perspectives.
Currently, what are you practicing? What does your practice look like? Is it like through doing a very physical practice that you're finding this resistance? Is it, are you meditating? Like, what, for you, what does it look like now to be meeting the resistance? How do you rise up toward that?
Oh, that's a great question, because my practice definitely goes through transitions. And I studied last summer. It wasn't a mistake. I call it a mistake, but it wasn't necessarily a mistake. I'm not a student that likes to study with a teacher and then quickly study with another teacher, because then I forget what that teacher offered. But it just so happened that two teachers that I wanted to study with were back to back pretty much. And I've almost all forgot everything that I learned from him, because the last one was the more present. So I found I was really working with her work, which was a lot of chairs and apparatus and opening and very fluid movements, which was nice because my practice was very rigid. But I found just in the past month, my body has really been craving that tradition of my teacher, Fike Beria, who is also the teacher of my teacher here in Montreal, or my old teacher here in Montreal. And I really wanted that tradition. Fike is big on donkey work. You work, you get it done. And I love that traditional aspect of Iyengar yoga. And when I see other practitioners, recently I connected with a woman, and she'll be coming here to teach, but I saw Fike in her practice. And I thought, oh, she's got to be a student of Fike's. And so I contacted her, and sure enough, she is. And I thought, that purity is there, that cleanliness is there, those 8 limbs without any, discussion, they're present in everything she's doing. And so right now I would say I've gone back to tradition. It's just me and the room. And, maybe there's a wall involved, or maybe there's a brick involved, or maybe I'll use the ropes, but take everything out. Just my body is my first problem.
And so you're doing a physical asana practice, yoga postures.
Physical asana practice.
Did you learn any kind of specific sequence, or is it just, do you have things that you're trying to do every day, or are you?
Yeah, I've been working in, God, I wish I knew the name. When you come from Pinchamayurasana to bring the feet over the head, I think it's a variation of Vrikshasana or something, to bring the feet over.
Good luck with that one.
I've been working with that for a couple of years. Put it away, then come it back. Put it away, come it back. Put it away. And I've been working with that because I figure I'm 47 years old, and it's kind of now or never if I want to go that route. It's not going to be at 55. I'm going to start, or maybe I will. Who knows? I should do that. But it's like
so. This is a forearm balance that's then going into dropping the feet down in front of your face, or I guess the back of your head, to go into a back bend. So it's a forearm balance, back bend.
Yeah, and I have the fear factor, which I know I'm strong enough, I know I'm stable enough, but it's really, there's my resistance. So there it is. You just got the answer to your question. It took me 2 minutes, but I got there. But, the resistance now is trust the practice, trust you, trust me, trust the situation, and then, be in there. And it's interesting because, again, I was watching this woman go into that pose, and I was seeing all of these principles. She took her time. Nothing was rushed. Everything was moving. And it was like all of this control, and yet complete abandon to the process. So trying not to control anything, but just being present for every transition that happens until feet touch the head. And this is life, right? We just want to be present. Just let me be present for the moment. And did I answer your question?
Yeah. It's interesting to hear what you're doing. Like, it's very, physically advanced to what you're doing. And, it's just nice to, that's really very much the Iyengar tradition, to really do that physical practice, hold yourself to excellence, push yourself. And I think because there is that teaching tradition where it's clear who the more advanced teachers are, there's always clarity about who you can study with to grow.
Yeah, it's true. And you were mentioning John Schumacher before.
Mm-hmm. I studied with him when I was about 23 years old. I had just gotten out of college. He had just opened up his studio. Unity was the first location, probably about a year before I started practicing with him, which of course I didn't know. I didn't know anything at the time. I was like just starting out. I just lucked into it, that I happened to get to study with John Schumacher, and I was pretty serious about it. But my life was pretty, up in the air, and I was just doing temp work. And so I moved pretty far away from his studio, and I tried to drive to it. And then after a while, it just got to be a lot. And so I dropped away from it.
I got one class with him, and I love his presence in class. I mean, it's really clear that he's at the high echelon, right? And yet he doesn't necessarily bring that in. He's, he really genuine human being. And every time I've seen him in interviews, I think he is rock and roll, and such a strong spokesman for the Iyengar method, because he put himself in a study group that I think, what is he, like 70 or something like that? Yes. I hope I'm not saying that and he's like 65. I think he's going.
He's got to be. I mean, I was, this was almost 30 years ago that I practiced with him, and he was already, he had to be in at least 35.
Okay, so he put himself in this study, and I think with people quite his junior. And it was just to show that you don't need anything else. If you're practicing yoga properly, you don't need anything else. And he came out on top of everyone. And I was just like, that's the spokesman. There he is. He's putting his money where his mouth is, and never has he been negligent with his practice or his teaching, or maybe not in ways that I've seen, but he has always been present, meeting the resistance. And you see, it applies to everything.
It was kind of weird because at the time, being so young, I just really thought that's what yoga teachers were. All of my teachers had all practiced at least. I've never studied with a teacher who had studied less than 15 or 20 years.
Absolutely.
And so when all of this teacher training started coming up, and people were, like nowadays people are like, oh yeah, I'm a yoga teacher. I took a teacher training, and it's pretty obvious that they really haven't studied it seriously. I was like, my whole idea of it was John Schumacher. Like, that's what I'll be like when I'm good enough to teach.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a whole other conversation, huh? That new teacher training thing. Well, actually, I think they're going through some troubles because was it through Occupy Yoga that we met?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. They seem to be having a huge falling out with Yoga Alliance. I guess Yoga Alliance.
I guess we'll get into this a little bit. And, I moderated Eric Schiffman's discussion board for many, many years. And he's not the only teacher that has had a big influence on me, but he's the most well-known and the person that I'm most associated with. Many of the people on that discussion board at that time, when I first did it, that was kind of when the Alliance was really first forming and having an influence. And I was new to teaching, so I kind of craved it. I kind of wanted to be a real official yoga teacher with a sticker. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate that I found that discussion board, and there were much more experienced people who said, that is not that path is not going to bring you happiness. And they from the early days of that discussion board, a voice emerged against the Yoga Alliance. So long before any, these conversations, and it's why I personally, I'm not looking to try to work within that system, because I just think I have a voice about really, I think what we should be doing is training teachers to understand what good training looks like. And I think Iyengar model is a really great example of good teacher training. And I'm really glad that I started in that system because it gave me that recognition of it.
That's interesting because as Iyengar teachers, we don't deal with the Yoga Alliance because we've got our own association. So, when I hear all these critiques about Yoga Alliance, I kind of think, well, who's wrong? Because Yoga Alliance was, just filling the demand.
No, Yoga Alliance is not actually an organization. That's the problem, is that they actually formed, the main purpose of the Yoga Alliance is to prevent regulation of yoga.
In what sense?
In the sense of legalized, you have to have a certificate from a state licensed organization to teach. Like for example, if you cut hair, you have to go to a school that is state licensed and get an official license before you can do that.
Okay.
Right? Even though, really cutting hair, you probably could do that without, being licensed, but that's the law in every state. Now, with yoga, there is no state that has that, and that's because of the Yoga Alliance. They're kind of a pretense of being an organization, like a trade organization. Okay. But the problem is that all these people kind of bought into the sham.
Okay, so they're a member of the Yoga Alliance, so they think that they're all done their job, and okay, interesting. Huh.
Yeah, I talked with many people who've gone through these programs, and they are very disappointed as a whole because they know that they're not really masters. They understand that a real teacher should have mastery of the subject, and they know that is not what they received. And so there's a lot of seeking, and a lot of people who are scared to get out and teach because I've talked with many people who have practiced yoga. This idea that it's a lot of people who haven't practiced is crazy. Many people who've gone through them, they've been studying for 6, 7, 8 years. And then and they're very good. But they don't feel confident because their teacher training didn't do what, like I went through my master's in engineering management. I got to the end of that, and it's like, I know I can lead. I know that I can do project management. I learned skills, that there was a path. Yeah. And people don't feel that way when they get through their teacher training. Yeah. And it's not like the Iyengars where, you know where you stand in it.
Oh yeah, when you go through your assessment and and you have 3 teachers walking around with notepads, taking notes on everything you do, and you've got timed on everything, and you've spent 6, 7 years preparing for that moment. We shine. We hope to shine, and some students more than others, of course. But and I feel grateful from my teacher, because my teacher, for sure, with everybody's issues that we all have, her strong suit was teacher training. Nice. When we went for our exams, even by comparison to some of the other teachers that were coming in to take their exams, and watching how they took their exams versus the way that she was trained and trained us, it was like, whew, there's a clear difference. I mean, it's all super Iyengar, but there was a real clear difference in her tradition, in her, she got the best of us out.
Yeah.
Got the best out of us. And
it's nice to be in your presence, because I really feel that sort of Iyengar energy, from you, which I haven't been around in a while, that people who have just been in that system, because I did for many, many years, and then I kind of went a different direction. So
I did too. In 2013, I left the centre, and I kind of went out on my own, because the box got too small.
So what happened with that? I'm curious to know, because that sounds like you were very into it.
A lot of it, again, was probably having to meet my own resistance. Relationships are what they are, and we become who we are and make the decisions that we make as a result of having all of that sediment within us. And I think part of my allure, or part of my love of the Iyengar method, is the rules, is the very clear rules. You know exactly where you stand, what you should be doing, how you should be behaving. We don't have to question that. But I also think that kind of a practice has also had a detriment, because it's built a lot of pride, it's built a lot of ego, and it then built a lot of distrust, because then people are power hungry, and I wouldn't, power hungry, that's a wrong, people have obtained a certain amount of power, and then it just becomes that regular atmosphere. You're not questioned on it. And so then I got to the point where it was like, ooh, there are certain things that aren't rubbing me right. And I already know my own shortcomings, and I can be in my home. As you see, I teach in my home, I live in my home. We always joke that I'm on the 50-day passage, I haven't left the home. You know, so, I won't leave my home, which means I can create all the stories that I want, and I'm the only one to divine if they're correct or not. So I can be as paranoid as I want, because I have no one questioning me. So I really had to break away from that, because I saw there's a lot of fear in the community. There's a lot of fear of having someone take something from you or be better than you, and so I really had to find a different way, and knowing I'm completely uninterested in anything but Iyengar yoga for my life. So I had to find a way to balance that.
So it sounds like, am I correct in saying that your issue was the community around you, and the Iyengar world wasn't supporting where you needed to go, because you wanted something that was more collaborative rather than, one of the things with Iyengar, for people who may not be familiar with it, is that it is super structured, and there's all these levels. Like it's not just, there's levels of practice up, level 1 when you start, and then level 2 after you get a certain level of skill, and then up through, I think it goes to level 5 now. And then they, after that, as a teacher, all the teachers are finally graded. In fact, we were talking about John Schumacher, and I noticed that he is not even a senior Iyengar teacher. Can you believe that? John Schumacher, if you look on the website, at least, maybe it's not, maybe they haven't updated the website or something, but he is not even one of their top tier teachers, which is crazy. There were like 2 teachers that are way up there, like Manos Manusal.
And I think it's Maya Raz. Maya Raz is here in Toronto, and Manuso Manos was the one I studied with this summer, that I was like, damn it, now I've got somebody else's, but I'll see him again this summer.
I took a workshop with him, like when I was pregnant with my daughter, so 20 years ago. He wasn't real crazy about the fact that I was pregnant.
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard when you're coming in to teach new students in a new atmosphere with a lot of people, and it's like, wow. Because the first time that I wanted to practice with Fike, my teacher told me no, because I had a cesarean. My daughter was breech, so she was surgically removed. And it was 3 months after, but she said he's equipped to be working with the general public for this workshop. So
you couldn't do it.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because it's like, okay, if I hurt myself, or he can't be watching 50 people in a room and make everybody safe, especially if someone's coming in with an affliction. So
yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so I kind of got off track in saying that there's these very rigid levels, and it sounds like it was that aspect. Yeah. That was also that while in a way it creates this clear path, and you always have a teacher above you, and you where you stand. That also that hierarchy.
It can
there was a lot of ego in it.
Yeah, it can get exhausting, and it can also hold you back, because I'm not my teacher, and I'm not the other students in the room, just as they are not me. And one of my favorite things about Iyengar yoga is that you'll go into an Iyengar class anywhere in the world, and it is so clear Iyengar yoga. But because the requirements for practice are stern and compulsory, everyone's personal thing comes out. So everyone has something different to give. We're not all the same. And I think that's really, and we have to foster that. And this was kind of my incentive. Well, this was my incentive in wanting to work with trained teachers, even of not the Iyengar method, is to foster them, because a lot of them are lost. Like you were saying, they don't know how to teach or what to teach because their teacher trainings didn't. Come on, Lily. No.
Oh, hi.
Yes, she's here. And so that was, I think I can be of service there. Because
we should talk about that. We will definitely do a conversation about teacher training, because that is a huge area of interest of mine. And I personally have a lot of ideas about this. My husband is a very, very advanced martial artist, and we've had a lot of conversations. They have many of the same issues in the martial arts world, but they have different solutions. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's ways that we can bring some of, and also they have different problems because it's a bunch of alpha males. So you can imagine.
Yoga can be a bunch of alpha males too. It can be quite misogynist, it can be, surprisingly, because we have mostly females practicing, right? But when you're in a big environment, there are a lot of male Iyengar teachers, and they choose that method because and that's how their minds work, right? But you be around these men and it can't.
It's useful for me to have the background, because I can teach when I have somebody who needs that. I can teach that way. Mm-hmm. Like I can just be like, this is how your feet go, this is where your hands are, and we're going to start very mechanical. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people that Iyengar is so wonderful when you really need to learn how to be attentive to your body and maybe don't have a lot of emotional skills. There's a way to access it. Yeah. And it's wonderful to be able to have the ability to teach somebody, who has that sort of very male, like sort of disassociation from their body, and they can find it through the work.
Yeah, it's true. And then, but I did find, you're right. In the end, I found it was really, it was too much. I had to back away, because then I got to that point where, as a child, I didn't necessarily know how to behave, because I wasn't going to be said, oh, that's a good thing. But then if I didn't do it, I would be told, you should have done it. So then it got to the point also in the method where, I should be teaching, but I shouldn't be teaching that way. And it was like, okay, well, I don't really know how to be something else. So I really had to just back out. And in backing out, going rogue, it actually brought me so much closer to my practice and so much closer to the man. And so it was the right thing to do.
Do you, just being no longer affiliated with the Iyengar system as a teacher, it sounds like you're still studying with Iyengar teachers exclusively, though. Are you exploring other traditions?
I'm still part of the association. I've still got my mark. Oh. So, and I'm kind of teetering right now. Like, okay, do I want to continue with exams? Let me get my foot back in the community little by little. I'll explore with the community outside of Montreal versus the community inside of Montreal. And maybe that again could be my own personal thing. Again, where is the resistance? Is it from me? Is it from them? Do I muddle the two? And these are to be determined.
So what you did was you kind of detached yourself more from your local community than from the larger organization.
Exactly. Because when I go to France and study, it's my friends from all over the world, and they're all Iyengar. And the woman that's coming here, she's an Iyengar teacher, but she's from Brazil. So it's not like I haven't lost touch with the community, or that I have lost touch with the community. It's just my closer community. And I tend to be a bit agoraphobic in that kind of way. So that could be all, and that's fine. I'll deal with that later.
Well, I think as you get, more advanced, then you sort of get really clear on who you need to study with. And so, and there's less and less of those people who are there, but.
You hit the nail on the head, because it's not that I'm lazy, but I can be lazy, or I can talk myself out of things or talk myself into things, as the case may be, right? I really need a teacher who will put a fire under me. I can't be just studying because I want a certification, and I won't feel like I merited that certification. I won't feel like I've learned anything. I'll have resentment for the money I spent, So I really need a teacher that puts a fire under me, that makes me want to meet the resistance, that makes me want to get confronted, makes me want to provoke the same response in my class.
I kind of, was ready to, I guess it was a little bit of just this personal situation that I was in at that studio. But also there was just a point where I was so Cirque du Soleil, and it was like I could meet, what you're saying, meet the resistance, like be at the edge of work, like, go into full splits or, ultra splits where you're going beyond splits and things like that. And it's like, well, that's an interesting place to explore, but it's like, at what point, you're going to turn into Gumby. Like, how can you explore that emotion without taking your body to those extreme places? I started to find that I was just less excited by that, because I really wanted to get into meditation, and the Iyengar people aren't teaching that. So I wanted to be with people who were saying, here's how you can find that expression of finding the edge. And you don't necessarily have to do it by going to this extreme physical limit, because it just became, it wasn't that I couldn't physically do it anymore. It was just that, like, I just like, how far do I have to go? Like, this is crazy, Yeah.
I'm not, the thing that I guess, when I look at my genetics, if you see my family, you would see that this body was not built for yoga. This body was built by yoga. And when I see the inflexibility in my family, I also see an inflexibility mentally. And I really didn't want to be that kind of a person. It's okay for people that are wanting to be that way or happy that way. It's fine. But for me, I couldn't be that person. And so I really had to break the confines of my body to also get out of those confines in my mind. And one thing I noticed with the scoliosis is there is a hyper stubbornness in scoliosis, and there is a stubbornness mentally as well as physically. And I guess that's why we contort ourselves, because we're trying to survive a situation. And so when you're coming out of that situation and all of a sudden you have to be unraveling into a more vulnerable situation, you can violently resist that situation. And it's interesting. I realized how stubborn and probably horrible I could be in certain situations, because it's not your typical stubborn, but again, like yoga, everything can be very vague or inconsistent in its consistency. But
it sounds like, in a way, that you had started by confronting this stubbornness in your body and scoliosis, and then at a certain point, as you became more advanced, it was like you found again that stubbornness in a new way, and that you realized that part of your growth has been to kind of say, well, here that is again. It's amazing. I am now 48 years old, and I find here I am again working on the same things I was when I was 20. Like, how annoying is that?
Absolutely. And that's beautiful, right? I mean, that's really beautiful that our practices can just keep us present and keep us reflective and always bring us back to the base. And I think that's really important, because if we just keep going, like you say, like, how far do I need to extend before the extension ends up hurting me?
Right.
And that's important for us to know and take note of as well. Where are those three qualities of openness, strength, and flexibility? And are they constantly balanced?
Right.
I guess it's kind of the same with doshas. I don't know much about Ayurveda, but the doshas and ensuring that they're constantly balanced so that we don't go to some extremity.
Yeah, I agree. I think there probably is that idea in there that there's just this sort of innate thing, and you just hit it over and over again in different ways, and then you have to, that's kind of your lesson, but to learn again and again. I think it's interesting. I want to encourage you to like keep meeting that resistance about what's happening in the Iyengar community, because I think it's so fascinating just watching you, hearing you talk about it. I feel that you're not done exploring that.
I'm not. I'm not. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I will. Yeah, I will. I can't. Like I said, I'm pretty much unfit for anything else. Like I couldn't go and just teach yoga, because it would always be, and I give him far too much credit for his work. When I see the things that he was doing at 95 years old,
right.
There is human possibility.
I saw him speak when he was I believe it was the last tour that he did of America, and I saw him speak. And
in 2005, yeah, that's right.
Yes. And it was interesting because it was a little, at that point, I had been out of the system for a long time, and it was a little like kind of seeing an old boyfriend that you'd gotten over. It's like, it was fascinating to see him in person. And then at the same time, I kind of felt like, yeah, that's not really where I'm at anymore. But I was so glad I did get to see him.
Yeah. I mean, he's a legend. The guy should have been dead at 14 and lived to be 96, lived to outlive everyone in his generation of teaching.
He's incredible. I've been going back and learning about his life and his practice. And, it's incredible what he did.
Yeah. The more I watch, I can't get bored of it. And I can't, I just see in his body human possibility. And it's like, we can do that, or we can do something totally different. But I'm going to choose to do that. And
I'm going to give you a challenge, and it's hard to find it on the web. So maybe I'll find it and send it to you. But look up some pictures of Swami Kripalu.
Okay.
Because he is fascinating in that he does the same Cirque du Soleil physicality, but his expression, he looks like a little baby. Like he's sitting there doing, like forearm, but the elbow hand, whatever you call that, where you're doing like a handstand, but it's an elbow under elbows. And he's like, the expression on his face is just like, la, la, la. And you're just like, how do you, like with Iyengar, he's so intense. And so there's like a fierceness to him. And with Swami Kripalu, he just looks like he's getting ready to take a nap.
Yeah, it's so, I had an idea one time, because I would look around when people are super focused and people's yoga faces. And I said, I should really do a book on people's yoga faces, because they are good. You got the ones that are, yoga faces are great when they're really in,
Well, I think that we've been talking for a while, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and give our guest a chance to ask any questions. So how can people find you if they're interested? Can you spell out the name of your website?
Let's see. Yoga, Y-O-G-A, equanimity, E-Q-U-I-M, N-I-M-I-T-E. And the E's both have accent marks going to the right.
So these are, this is in Montreal, so this is French. And we'll be putting the link or the YouTube video and beneath for the video in the group below. So you don't have to really be able to spell it. You can just click the link.
Actually, hang on, I'll get something for you.
And she'll be back in a minute. She's going off to get a prop. Oh, look, now you can spell it. See, that's how you spell it. Yoga equanimity. Thank you, Kara. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.